I just obtained the power of the creator. But the next day I was diagnosed with late-stage stomach cancer by the hospital. In order to survive, I turned the orchard in my hometown into a sandbox world. I tried to accelerate the evolution process of Central era, Salonji era. I tried to accelerate the evolution and process of life, only hoping to create a civilization that can cure cancer. The square sandbox was constantly explored by the little people inside. One day, they suddenly discovered with horror that this world has a round sky and a square earth, and there were even super large giants tens of thousands of feet tall. When the development of civilization did not meet my expectations, I would tear everything down and start over. I would give the hero of each civilization a chance to ask me a question. Whenever they asked me how many days it took to create the world, I thought of the scene when I dug the soil to build the sandbox. It took me a full 7 days to create this land. So, God created all things, and the legend of it taking only 7 days spread across this land. Civilizations replaced one another in my sandbox time and again. But who would have thought that so many splendid and glorious civilizations actually originated from a single spore? Back then, in the 100-acre sandbox in the orchard, I built an artificial shallow pond and turned it into an ocean according to the saltwater ratio. In this central ocean, I put in a large number of therp spores and accelerated the speed of cell division by 10,000 times. For every day that passed in reality, 10,000 years would pass in the sandbox. Yet even so, it wasn't until the 5th day that these single cells began to evolve into some plankton. The central ocean became visibly turbid, so I quickly set up genetic constraints to limit the body size of the spore creatures, not allowing these creatures to evolve too large. On the afternoon of the 6th day, after experiencing the single-celled Paleozoic ocean of the first 5 days, multicellular organisms finally appeared in the seawater. In just a few minutes, like a fast-forwarded ecological documentary, species kept being born and going extinct within seconds, and then giving birth to the next generation. But by the time the sun went down, as I expected, the sandbox world ushered in its first mass extinction. 12 hours of darkness meant that this place would lose sunlight for up to 5,000 years. Large areas of aquatic plants withered and sank to the seabed. There was no sign of life under the night sky. My beach environment was too small, and the scarce biological base was not enough to evolve new species that could adapt to the environment. But in my ocean, there were highly adaptable xeric single cells. Half an hour after the moonlight fell, a touch of faint blue emerged on the sea surface full of plant corpses. It was an ant-sized leaf-shaped blue plant. Unbelievably, having lost the red sunlight, this plant actually aimed the source of its photosynthesis at the moon. I was amazed and named this plant blue silver grass. After this plant successfully survived the first round of mass extinction, it began to evolve rapidly in just a few seconds. The blue silver grass adapted frantically to the dark environment, spreading flat on the sea surface like lotus leaves, absorbing the moonlight above the yard over a large area. Another hour passed, and it went through tens of thousands of generations of species evolution, starting to form various branches, and even developing into 2 differentiated species. One part of the blue silver grass continued to absorb moonlight to enhance conversion efficiency, while the other part actually turned carnivorous, relying on absorbing moonlight to emit a faint fluorescence to attract other blue silver grass plankton to float over and develop them and devour them. Observing up to this point, I couldn't help but marvel at the tenacity and wonder of life. This only surviving aquatic plant, actually, in the dark ocean, developed its own diverse ecosystem. I had a sudden whim, intending to record these things, so I quickly found a black notebook, opened to the first page of Genesis, and wrote down the Manhua era. The sun set and the moon rose. The world plunged into a long darkness of 5,000 years. 99% of marine life went extinct. Only the blue-silver grass survived. In this dark ocean, the blue-silver grass became the overlord of this era. I looked at the pond that had become an ocean of life, silently expecting. Next would be marine animals. My xeric cells. What kind of marine animals would they evolve into? I didn't sleep all night, waiting for the dawn. But when the 7th day finally began, the various blue-silver grass that flourished in the deep night withered rapidly. Accustomed to the faint moonlight, they sank to the ocean floor as if being burnt. In an instant, the blue-silver grass began a massive extinction. By afternoon, another touch of blue gradually regained vitality from the dead colonies. It was a 5-star-shaped blue-silver grass. It underwent its own mutation, successfully escaping this mass extinction. In order to adapt to the intense sunlight, it began to reproduce generation after generation. In just a few minutes, this kind of blue-silver grass died, and was reborn for countless generations, gradually transforming from blue, eventually forming a sea of black-blue 5-pointed star seagrass. I was deeply moved, naming this species Zijao grass, opened to the second page of the black notebook, and wrote down the Guangwu era. Heaven and earth changed suddenly. The moon set, and the sun rose. The scorching sun hung high for 5,000 years. The blue-silver grass overlord that had survived the Manhua era went extinct on a large scale. Among them, the weak lineage of Zijao grass rose to prominence, becoming the protagonist that dominated this era. Night fell on the 7th day. The Zijao grass lived peacefully in the ocean, already able to withstand 5,000 years of alternating sun and moon. At the same time, the photosynthesis of a large number of aquatic plants significantly increased the oxygen content of the seawater, and the conditions for the birth of marine animals were met. Soon, single-celled organisms in the ocean began to evolve. The first to appear was a group of creatures shaped like black beetles. At this point, marine animals entered the historical stage of the evolutionary era. The moment I saw animals appear, I finally showed a relieved smile. Carrying my exhausted body, after staying up all day and night, I went back to my room and fell fast asleep. When I woke up, it was already the 8th day of the sandbox creation. I found that some marine animals, not satisfied with the highly competitive ocean, had evolved into amphibians, living on the barren shores. so I quickly recorded on the page. After the Guangwu era, the Third Era, the Neo Era, an explosion of various animals, the first marine animals appeared. A golden age of species. Invertebrates temporarily dominated the seas, relying on their shells, becoming the overlord of the era, but failed to dominate for too long. Vertebrates were born, defeating them with the advantage of agility, becoming the overlord of the Neo Era, crawling out of the ocean to rule over a long era. After writing this, I silently closed the black notebook. Although the spores were about to evolve into terrestrial creatures, but to evolve intelligent life, but I didn't know how much longer it would take. So I had a sudden inspiration, planning to drip my own blood into it. But this idea was too bold. Being cautious, I decided to experiment with other genes first. I went out to the zoo, on the pretext of a university project, and bought a chimpanzee blood sample. By the time I returned to the orchard, the entire 100-acre miniature sandbox had already turned into a small ecological world. The mountains and rivers were full of greenery, and the plains were covered with bizarrely shaped trees. There were also animals swimming in the rivers. I walked into this huge 100-acre experimental field, and eventually chose a beetle-shaped creature, releasing them into a brand new experimental field, only 1 square meter in size. After injecting the chimpanzee blood, I accelerated the passage of time. Those that couldn't survive the blood rejection reaction all died. Tens of millions of beetle species died in just 2 days. From the surviving population, I selected a small batch with the most successful blood fusion, naming them the insect apes. The appearance of the insect apes was very close to humans, but unlike humans, they had round black armor growing on their backs. Black jade insect apes. It took a full 2 days, which, for the orchard's 100-acre sandbox, was equivalent to 20,000 years having passed. Some powerful species emerged, trees towered into the clouds, and a large number of giant species were born, meaning that the sandbox had entered a terrifying era, similar to the Jurassic period. Among them, the largest beast with a black disc on its head had already reached the size limit I set, the size of a cat. I took the experimental insect ape clan and released them in the south of the sandbox, inside a grand canyon surrounded by green trees. Wanting to know how, in such an era, the insect apes would survive at the same time, I adjusted the time flow of the sandbox to 100 years. Per Dalton Y. Early the next morning, I rushed straight to the sandbox to observe that batch of insect apes. To my pleasant surprise, they had already developed a primitive tribal social structure and had even given rise to a crude language and culture. But what worried me was, they were simply too weak. Their ancient genes from 20,000 years ago were not enough to fight against the giant beasts of 20,000 years later. I couldn't just stand by and watch the insect apes whom I had worked so hard to breed go extinct. So I decided to create some sparks of civilization for them. I bought a miniature guest greeting pine bonsai online, and customized a sword only slightly thicker than a needlepoint, an exquisitely crafted alloy giant sword. By the time these 2 items arrived, a day had passed, which was 150 years for the insect apes. At this time, the insect clan in the sandbox was becoming scarcer and scarcer, almost on the verge of extinction. Instead, I felt somewhat relieved by this. Surviving 150 years in such an era, without going extinct, showed that they still had great potential. I adjusted the time flow to 1:1, and walked into the sandbox. At this time, the insect ape tribe was in ruins, with corpses strewn everywhere.
Run! We can't hide here either! The Dark Claws are coming!
Several male insect apes growled, telling the women and children behind them to retreat, while they themselves brandished giant horn clubs of unknown beasts, and rushed forward at several pitch-black beasts named Dark Claws. We must survive. The women and young insect apes fled all the way, with looks of despair on their faces. They seemed to have grown accustomed to this flight, and the female insect apes who had rushed out before had now become food for the Dark Claws. Blood splattered everywhere. Seeing this scene from afar, I felt some pity. The casualties of the primitive tribe were too heavy, and as I strode forward, the fleeing insect apes only felt the earth shaking. In the ancient forest, filled with a wild aura, countless beasts flew up in panic. Large numbers of species fled outward. Mountains and rivers were flattened. Some powerful species didn't even have time to react before being crushed to death by a foot descending from the sky. I quickly caught up with those fleeing insect ape soldiers. The few Dark Claws that were tearing at the corpses of the insect apes were also stepped on and crushed to death by me in passing.
Heavens! What is that? How can there be such a huge creature? It is even larger than the largest 100-meter giant beast, Flimba. I 10,000 times to actually step on and crush the terrifying Dark Claw in 1 foot!
The insect apes turned their heads to look, only to see a vast creature towering into the clouds, like an ancient giant passing through the clouds of the sky. They screamed, and instantly collapsed to the ground. I could understand the language of these insect apes, and paid no mind to their shock. After all, to them, I was equivalent to the creator.
Run! Quickly run! We can't escape! We are only the size of one of his hairs!
Countless fleeing insect apes went limp on the ground, but while everyone was screaming, a young insect ape stubbornly looked up at the sky and shouted at me.
Are you this giant beast also here to eat us? You killed father and mother, and killed the great beast! Why are we so weak?
Somewhat surprised by the bravery of this young insect ape, so I had a thought. Then, I choose you. I gently reached out my hand and held this insect, ape in my palm. The mind of this young insect, ape instantly went blank. The giant creature's palm was like a boundless continent, and he was merely on the palm, the size of a fine palm print line. He looked up again. The eyes of the 10,000-foot giant were like the brilliant sun in the sky. Because to the species in the sandbox, I had shielded my face. They could only see my blurred face emitting a hazy glow. I held this tiny insect ape in one hand. My eyes calm. Gilgamesh, do you want to change all this? This young insect suddenly began to tremble. He screamed loudly in my palm.
You can actually communicate! In this world, there is actually a 10,000-foot giant with wisdom! Why do you call me Gilgamesh?
I held him in my palm and placed him level before my eyes, answering calmly. A name is one of the manifestations of wisdom. Gilgamesh, standing on the palm, suddenly became excited.
We can both communicate, and are both intelligent beings. Why don't you save us? You are clearly so powerful. And so grand!
The insect apes did not know what kind of entity I was, only thinking I was an intelligent creature similar to a giant beast. I didn't intend to explain this either. Holding Gilgamesh in my palm, I strolled across the mountains and rivers. Large swathes of trees and creatures were flattened. I had this weak insect ape on my palm look down, my voice resounding, echoing through the sky. Look, every species in this world is equal. You are just the same as every other plant and animal. Why should I save only you? Is it just because you possess intelligence? Gilgamesh was instantly speechless. Suddenly he began to scream in despair.
Then why did you come to find us?
No one can save you, and do not expect anyone to rescue you. Only you can save yourselves. But I can hand the means of civilization over to you, so you can save yourselves. Gilgamesh stood on my palm, looking down in shock. This was the first time he, from the perspective of the clouds, looked down upon this vast land. Mountains and rivers curled under his eyelids. Countless beasts fled and roared beneath the giant's feet, forming a vast scene shocking to the extreme. What a splendid and fantastical high-altitude scenery. What a terrifying yet desirable great power. So he spoke tremblingly.
Civilization! What is it again?
I had never thought about explaining what civilization is to this newborn race. So, after thinking for a moment, I gave my answer. Civilization is a spark. It is knowledge and also order. And even more, a powerful force within wisdom, used to protect oneself. Hearing the words powerful force, Gilgamesh became somewhat lost in thought. I placed him on my shoulder and walked back to the Grand Canyon, then took the miniature welcoming pine bought online from my backpack and planted it in the soil. This was merely a 60-centimeter welcoming pine, but to this miniature land, it was an endless sacred tree towering into the clouds. Looking up, clouds and mist swirled around, and the giant winding canopy seemed endless. If you want to obtain the power of civilization, then show your courage. Climb the sacred tree. This is my trial for you, a trial of wisdom and courage. Saying this, I placed a customized giant metal sword and a match soaked in kerosene on the treetop. Thinking for a moment, I also placed a capsule containing termite genes on the treetop. This was a byproduct of the previous experiment. When creating the insect ape race, the loud voice echoed through the sky once again. These are the three treasures of civilization. First, the sword of judgment. It is the weapon that protects civilization. Unlike the barbaric species spread across the land, only species that can harness the power of tools can be called intelligent species. Second, the torch, burning with a scorching flame. It is the bridge that sustains civilization. Mastering the spark of fire is the enlightenment of civilization. Third, the blood of power. Only the bravest warriors in the world can consume it. Survive the baptism of the blood of power, and you will possess unparalleled power. Fail to survive, and you will die. If you want to change the destiny of your race, then climb the sacred tree before the torch goes out, and attain the three treasures of civilization. After saying this, I gently placed this young insect ape on the ground, and then, amidst his shock, stepped over the mountains and departed. The moment I walked out of the orchard, I immediately sped up the flow rate of the sandbox by 100 times. Thus, the match that could only burn for a few seconds would, for the creatures inside the sandbox, burn for several days. Then, using binoculars, I clearly saw the scene under the sacred tree. The young Gilgamesh, climbing the sacred tree with a resolute face, in my eyes. The little insect's climbing motion was so fast, it was just an afterimage, falling countless times in just a few seconds, and then struggling to climb up again. At around 10 seconds, he finally successfully climbed to the top of the sacred tree. But in reality, to Gilgamesh in the sandbox, he could no longer remember how long he had been climbing, or how many times he had failed. At the peak of the sacred tree, standing on the lush green canopy, Gilgamesh held his sword high, seemingly saying something, and then quickly turned into an afterimage, climbing down the sacred tree. I was somewhat curious, so I used my creation abilities to recreate the scene at the top of the sacred tree just now. I saw Gilgamesh conquer the sacred tree, holding high the sword of judgment. Swinging it over his head, he looked down at the scenery of all living things beneath the tree, the bone armor on his back pitch black and shiny, his resolute face full of confidence.
Also possessing wisdom. In the future, we will be just like that giant beast of wisdom. Every clansman will have majestic divine power, and the power to make countless giant beasts flee. I must lead my people to stand at the top, and spread the sparks of civilization across the land.
The top of the sacred tree of the ancient era. This moment was recorded to become eternal. Tens of millions of years later, once existing on this land, extremely prosperous, yet short-lived. The oldest Yanli dynasty. People discovered through archaeology the historical Yanli hymns written by the ancestors for the great king. This oldest document, Genesis, ancient history of Yanli records. The giant beast of wisdom was 10,000 chang high, with a sacred face, stepping on and crushing the earth, mountains and rivers as it came, bestowing the sacred tree, setting up a trial of wisdom. It handed the 3 treasures of civilization to the young hero king Gilgamesh. When I woke up the next morning, the sandbox world in the orchard had already passed a long 100 years. For the insect apes with an average lifespan of 40 to 50 years, 2 generations had already passed. I was somewhat looking forward to it. After 2 generations, that once immature insect ape Gilgamesh, had he already died of old age? The answer was no. That once immature insect ape Gilgamesh, had he already died of old age? The answer was no. It gave me a big surprise. During the first 10 years after I left, Gilgamesh continued to lead the insect apes in their flight. He marveled that there were such miraculous things in the world. Fire could cook food, drive away giant beasts at night, and provide warmth in the cold nights. No wonder the giant beast of wisdom said, that fire represents the origin of civilization, and that sword of judgment, in this primitive giant forest, was an invincible weapon. With the help of the sharp weapon, Gilgamesh slew countless fierce beasts, allowing his people to scrape by, and finally have the power to fight back. During the second 10 years, Gilgamesh shed his immaturity and entered his 30s. He became majestic and tall, becoming the strongest hunter of the insect ape clan, known by the tribe as the Hero King. He even used fire to burn the land, to make it fertile, and began primitive farming. He was overbearing, arrogant, and tyrannical, and thought himself supreme. The giant beast of wisdom had handed the 3 treasures of civilization to him, and he clearly knew that civilization is the inheritance of knowledge and history. So he boldly created the scorpion-shaped script to record the history of the race, and innovated the language. He considered himself the first wise being to open up the civilized world. So, the history of his creation of civilization was recorded in books, and given hymns of praise, shamelessly naming it Genesis. He was tyrannical and brutal, autocratic and dictatorial, yet possessed immense personal charisma. He had 131 wives in the tribe, to bear him offspring. Most of these offspring were strong and powerful, inheriting his stature and wisdom. But the insect apes had an average lifespan of only 30 or 40 years. At this time, Gilgamesh was already in his 30s. The one who once wielded the sword of judgment, the wild and uninhibited Hero King, had now welcomed his twilight years. In the treehouse built of wood, the fire in the fireplace burned fiercely. Gilgamesh sat quietly on a giant chair woven from dark cloth fur, staring at the flames and murmuring to himself,
"That is the flame of civilization bestowed upon me by the giant beast of wisdom. It is so beautiful and gorgeous, like leaping fiery red pistols."
Gilgamesh's entire tall and stalwart body was already old and frail. He turned his head to look at the wall, where the heads of giant beasts hung one by one. These were the bones of various giant beasts from this land. His life had been glorious enough, splendid enough. He had realized his youthful dreams, and he was satisfied. The next tribal chief had already been decided to be his son, Artoria, whose abilities were not inferior to his, and who could lead the entire tribe to continue its glory. Gilgamesh could clearly feel his life gradually drawing to a close. Death is inevitable for living things. He had almost resigned himself to fate. Then, he silently took out the blood of strength from back then, sighing,
"Everything is now free of worries." Back then, the giant beast of wisdom said that only the bravest warrior in the world could take this 3rd treasure. Am I the bravest warrior in the world? Let me see.
The hero in his twilight years widened his cloudy eyes slightly, remembering the glorious years of his life in a daze. He suddenly shed tears. Widened his cloudy eyes slightly, remembering the glorious years of his life in a daze. He suddenly shed tears. He suddenly shed tears, silently piercing his arm and pouring the blood of strength onto the wound. An incomparable, sharp pain struck. Gilgamesh struggled and fell to the ground. This hero in his final years, who had experienced countless battles in his life, had never gasped so violently in pain. In the end, he survived death and slowly stood up. His long hair had lost its original color, becoming incredibly silver white. His face as perfect and young as a god's.
"This kind of powers. In the treehouse."
In the treehouse, a stalwart, white-haired young man murmured to himself,
"The blood of strength. What a great power this is!"
At this moment, Gilgamesh could clearly feel the continuous surge of power within him. At the same time, in the tribe, Gilgamesh's son, Artoria, was standing on high ground, holding high the sword of rupture, announcing his succession to the chief's position. Artoria was wise and martial, possessing both ability and virtue. Compared to his tyrannical and arrogant father, he was more like a qualified and kind chief. Gilgamesh was also aware of this, which was why he was willing to hand over the position to him in his old age. But now everything is different. Artoria was very kind and deeply loved, and had enough respect for her father, never thinking of taking her father's place. But Gilgamesh still allowed no hidden dangers to exist.
"I am back. The position of leader is still mine."
On this day, blood was shed, and the wails echoed in the Yanli tribe. The hero King Gilgamesh killed his child to reclaim the throne of leader, living his second life. In Gilgamesh's first 10 years of living his second life, he led the people to build houses with stone. The insect Apele officially entered the stone age of resisting giant beasts. Gilgamesh, without using the blood of power, possessed the termite gene, and could easily uproot century-old giant trees, possessing the strength to move mountains. He led his people to fight against giant beasts. After 13 years of warfare, he chose to challenge the most terrifying existence on this land. Fenba, the 100-meter giant beast, claimed to have the strongest power in the world. Fenba was the ruling king of the giant beast era on this continent, which was the creature that evolved to my sandbox size limit back then. Gilgamesh fought Fenba for 3 days and 3 nights. The earth cracked, canyons collapsed, and countless giant beasts fled in the forest. On that day, Gilgamesh was covered in blood, holding the sword of rupture in one hand, and dragging the corpse of the 100-meter giant beast Fenba with the other. His single-handed strength could actually drag Fenba's corpse, which was comparable to a towering hill. People of countless tribes were proud of it, shocked to the extreme, writing hymns for him, praising his strength. This is the strongest hero king in history.
I want to found a nation.
At the moment of his return, looking at the people of the Stone Tool tribe, he suddenly said so. Instantly, the tribe boiled with excitement. People wept with joy. They knew clearly that under the leadership of this great hero king, the days of wandering and displacement were over. They no longer had to fear the brutality of the giant beasts. A new era of civilization had begun. History is written by the victors. Gilgamesh did not record the atrocity of killing his child, but instead recorded his heroism in Genesis. The history archives of the Yanli dynasty record, Gilgamesh took the blood of power and slayed the legendary giant beast Fenba, moving giant stones around, to build the first city-state in history, Lishi City. As time went by, Gilgamesh, who could not defeat the entire land, began to dedicate himself to developing civilization. He ruled with diligence, extremely charming because of me, yet tyrannical and overbearing. He created currency, perfected language, built cities, yet cruelly divided people into social classes. He wasted the manpower and money, sending a large number of warriors to explore the boundaries of the world. He was the people's great hero king, but also an outright tyrant. In the 87th year of the Yanli dynasty, Gilgamesh was 127 years old. The Lishi royal city reached a terrifying population of tens of millions. Countless slaves were traded here, and a colosseum was even built, where nobles amused themselves. The tribal people of those days had already passed away. Hundreds of years passed. Their descendants no longer remembered the hardships and struggles of their ancestors, gradually decaying in ease. However, the king of Yanli of those days was still heroic and martial. In the dim and gloomy hall of Martyr Kings, a tall and handsome man stood calmly before the exquisite throne of white bones, with the legendary sword of rupture never leaving his side.
The great king of Yanli, lord of the city-states, His Majesty Gilgamesh, we have finished exploring the entire land.
Han Ming, the imperial minister and star envoy, bowed slightly, enthusiastically recounting what he had seen and heard over the years.
We have finished exploring the entire land.
Han Ming, the imperial minister and star envoy, bowed slightly, enthusiastically recounting what he had seen and heard over the years.
What is our world like?
Gilgamesh stared at the minister in front of him, his sharp gaze seeming to pierce through the blue sky outside the palace. Back then, those warriors who explored the world set out in all directions, spending a full several decades of time, with countless casualties going back and forth, finally learning the shape of the entire world today. Han Ming gestured respectfully and exaggeratingly.
Our world has a round sky and a square earth. The sky is an infinitely high and distant arc, and the ground is a perfect square. In the center is a huge ocean, surrounded by mountains and rivers. On this incomparably vast land, riding the fastest flying beast in a straight line, to travel back and forth between the edges of the world would also take more than 20 years.
Gilgamesh on the throne was silent for a moment, and said,
All right, you may dismiss.
Yes, your majesty. Han Ming stood up to leave, suddenly paused, turned his head to look at their king with adoration. This great king of heroes led them out of the caves, founded tribes, stepped from the agricultural era into the Stone Age, and then entered the era of city-states. He slaughtered the most terrifying king of giant beasts, Fenba, leading one era of civilization after another. More than 30 years ago, Han Ming was still a young ranger, summoned into the palace by His Majesty, ordered to map the geography of the city-states, until 30 years later, when he returned to the Martyr King city again. To complete his mission, he was no longer a youth, but a trembling old man. With cloudy eyes. He was no longer a youth, but a trembling old man, with cloudy eyes, who had not much longer to live. Yet His Majesty was still just as he used to be, without the slightest trace of the passage of time. What a great monarch this is. Han Ming's body trembled, his eyes filled with fanaticism. Over the past 100 years, His Majesty had no longer shown his power, and his strength had long since grown to an unknowable level. Perhaps in the future, this long-lived, immortal king will lead the people of Yanli into the next era of civilization. Our world has a round sky and a square earth. After the palace became empty, Gilgamesh recalled these words and sighed for a long time. He gently stroked the giant sword beside him, as if it were a lover who had accompanied him through endless years.
The power of the torch has been mastered, and I have also thoroughly understood the blood of power. But the sword of rupture, I have searched the entire world, yet I have not found how it was forged.
Gilgamesh whispered, stroking the bleeding Uttershock.
What on earth is this material? What kind of giant beast's bone is it? Or the craftsmanship of what civilization?
Unfortunately, this world is ultimately not the real world. I did not bury any ores in the sandbox. Therefore, the civilization in the sandbox can only remain stuck in the Stone Age forever. In their understanding of the world, the word metal will never exist. To this world, this shining and indestructible material is mysterious, powerful, and unique.
Even after searching to the end of the world, we still haven't found that great beast of wisdom from back then.
An indestructible material is mysterious, powerful, and unique.
Even after searching to the end of the world, we still haven't found that great beast of wisdom from back then. Where on earth, in this world, does he live? The civilization possessed by the beast of wisdom is simply unfathomable. This sword of rupture, gifted to me, although I treasure it like a priceless gem. But this holy sword that opened up the entire civilization, is it not also warning me that the power known as civilization, I have only mastered a part of it, and the rest is all unknown, just like this sword. The secret of how it was forged makes me feel deeply afraid. The sword of rupture is like a sword hanging overhead, gradually hanging high above my head, ready to fall at any moment and take my life. Oh, the power of civilization is truly something to yearn for.
Gilgamesh sat on the throne, like a sleeping lion that had been lying down for a long time, his eyes slowly gazing into the distance. In a daze, he recalled the long years of over 100 years ago. That stalwart and giant figure back then, the ultra-large giant thousands of feet tall, shining all over, born sacred, holding his young self in his broad palm, looking down upon the mountains and rivers of the world, teaching him the three treasures of civilization. This was a scene he could never forget in his life, vivid in his mind, as if it were yesterday.
Unfortunately, my life is coming to an end again. The blood of power no longer has any effect on me. I want to live a third life. Great beast of wisdom, I want to see you again.
But unfortunately, at this time, I was chatting and eating with the girl next door, and did not hear Gilgamesh's plea. Of course, even if I had heard it, I wouldn't have paid attention to him. A life dying of old age must ultimately die of old age. No one can live forever. Gilgamesh had already lived a legendary life that even I envied, glorious all his life, in the spotlight of everyone. What else could he regret? But I ultimately underestimated Gilgamesh's desire for life. After experiencing the fear and rebirth brought by death once, he feared death completely. This heroic monarch wanted to live a third life. In the 102nd year of the Yanli dynasty, Gilgamesh was 142 years old. This legendary king, who already possessed 3 times the lifespan of ordinary citizens, actually began to look old. He was completely shocked and furious at the world, directly ordering the mobilization of the entire nation to find the beast of wisdom. At the same time, he gathered extraordinary people and eccentrics from all over the world to refine medicine and study dark magic. For a time, in the primeval forest, a large number of giant beasts were slaughtered, and various body parts were used for experiments. The dark claws, which had once been extremely prosperous, were even driven nearly to extinction because of this. History entered the famous era of tyrannical city-states. 13 years later, a court dark wizard created a longevity potion, successfully extending Gilgamesh's life. But soon, drug resistance developed, and taking it multiple times had no effect anymore. Gilgamesh again gradually moved towards unstoppable decline. Death is unavoidable for any living creature. Even the greatest hero cannot escape it. In the 145th year of the Yanli dynasty, another 30-odd years passed. Gilgamesh felt his life rapidly fading away. The majestic old man sat motionless on the throne, closing his eyes and murmuring to himself,
"My life is coming to an end. I clearly do not want to die yet."
After sitting quietly for 3 days, he finally opened his aged eyes, choosing to lie low in time, and began selecting the next generation of king candidates. In an instant, the dynasty was in an uproar. The great king was going to die. The long-lived and immortal hero King Gilgamesh was actually coming to the end of his life too. But for a time, no one dared to respond. The last time Gilgamesh grew old, he made his most trusted son, Artoria, the next leader, but killed him with his own hands after living his second life. Everyone was afraid of becoming the next Artoria. However, Gilgamesh was indeed the smartest king. He directly ordered
that the candidates for the throne would receive the blood of power, possessing power comparable to mine, and need not fear me, and would be granted the right to lead their subordinates to establish a second royal city outside, bestowing the blood of power and allowing the construction of cities.
As soon as the news came out, the whole country was shocked. Countless merchants, slaves, commoners, nobles, and craftsmen flocked to the front of the palace. In the end, even if countless people passed the trials, they died from the rejection of the blood of power. Only the forest warrior, Li Chidu, and the grassland barbarian general, Randall, these two obtained the blood of power and survived, each establishing a city-state. Two next-generation kings with the blood of power appeared. They were about to transition royal power, succeeding the dying Gilgamesh, and leading the next generation of Yanli civilization. Civilization began with Gilgamesh, but it could not end in his hands. In the 175th year of the Yanli dynasty, three kings stood together, governing the world together. The Yanli city-states entered an unprecedented golden age. Gilgamesh suddenly felt death completely descending. He began his final struggle, summoning craftsmen to build a temple of the wisdom giant that was even more exquisite than the Lashi royal palace. Inside the huge stone temple, a majestic and tall giant statue stood. The vast and boundless giant in the glow held the young hero king in one hand. Gilgamesh, with slightly blue eyes, looked down upon the entire land, his body emitting an astonishing white-gray divinity. On that day, Gilgamesh led his ministers and all his millions of citizens to worship the wisdom giant nationwide, hoping that the great lord of wisdom could sense their sincerity.
If only he could see the wisdom giant one last time before dying.
Gilgamesh's aged face suddenly burst into tears. Nearly 100 years later, the dying Gilgamesh LD'd the entire court of ministers to worship at the temple, pleading a second time to see the wisdom giant again.
Oh, great giant beast of wisdom! Gilgamesh wishes to see you again!
The devout resolve of this hero king is only to see once more the one who once bestowed upon him the three famous treasures, the mysterious giant beast of wisdom. Because the commotion was so massive, I, who was walking with my neighbor's sister, suddenly received a message from the creator brain. I felt somewhat emotional, but still decided to go meet this old friend. And I should also stop the bug ape clan. I didn't expect that after accelerating the time flow of the sandbox, in just a few short days, they would destroy countless ecosystems in the sandbox and drive a large number of species to extinction. And all of this was just for Gilgamesh's grand dream of immortality. I restored the time flow in the sandbox to normal, and then strode into the sandbox world. At this moment, for the creatures in the sandbox, the ground was slightly vibrating. Mountains, rivers, earth, and oceans all seemed to be trembling. Trees were trampled, leaving giant footprints in the valleys. Countless beasts fled and ran in the dense forest. Gradually, the entire Lashi royal city also began to shake slightly. What is happening? Is the city about to collapse? At this time, Gilgamesh was leading his ministers to worship the stone statue of wisdom. Suddenly, he seemed to sense something. The aged face of this great hero king actually showed a childlike joy for the first time.
After 200 years, the great lord of wisdom I saw in my childhood. The giant beast of wisdom who bestowed upon me the three treasures of civilization. He has finally returned.
I looked at the giant Lashi city, which accommodated tens of millions of people, and marveled slightly. Although in my eyes, it was merely a city the size of a basketball court. But after all, it was built by the tiny bug apes, and was already extremely grand and magnificent. I looked down at the exquisite altars and temples in the city. Under the tall stone statue, that elderly hero king, entirely snow white, was looking up, holding the sword of rupture, gazing at me with crystal tears streaming down. I looked down at this tearful, white-haired old man, feeling somewhat emotional. Back then, that green, young bug ape I held in the palm of my hand. The passionate youth, standing atop the giant tree, holding the sword of rupture and roaring at the sky. He has already reached his twilight years, approaching the end of his days. Yet his ambitious, youthful posture seemed as if it were just yesterday. Gilgamesh, have you been well all these years? I spoke softly, my voice penetrating the vast layers of clouds, and falling into the bustling Lashi royal city below. Gilgamesh, leaning on the sacred sword, trembled all over.
Have I been well?
His throat was dry and hoarse, looking at the sky, this giant towering into the clouds. Even if it wasn't the first time seeing him, he was still moved by this magnificent sight. The 10,000 jump tall, vast giant pierced straight into the sky, his torso seeming to prop up the entire heaven and earth. A dense glow covered his face, and the pure holy light faintly shone through the clouds, making his majesty obscured. The giant looked down upon the entire Lashi city, stately, solemn, and holy. Any words in the world could hardly describe that shocking beauty. Heavens, it actually exists. The entire city's population of tens of millions, whether merchants dressed in fine leather robes, or slaves in ragged clothes, all civilian craftsmen put down their work, walked out of their houses, stood on the streets, looking up at a vast giant piercing the sky. This is the legendary giant beast of wisdom that granted us civilization. To think it is actually a supersized giant, 10,000 jump tall. What a great life this is, comparable to the sun, moon, and stars in the sky. Everyone was immersed in shock, minds blank, yearning, fear, shock, countless complex emotions intertwined, ultimately turning into unparalleled admiration. Gilgamesh looked at the equally shocked expressions of the palace ministers around him. laughed in spite of himself. He remembered when he first saw the giant beast of wisdom. It was also this feeling of horror. Silent for a moment, Gilgamesh looked up with a look of longing.
Giant beast of wisdom!
Gilgamesh looked up with a look of longing.
Giant beast of wisdom! The heritage of civilization you handed to me over 100 years ago. I have achieved it!
10,000 meters high in the sky, as if I were a vast giant crossing through eternity, voice penetrating the clouds, scattering down upon the Lishi royal city below. Your great achievements will be recorded in the one you ordered to be written, Yanling Epic Genesis. You will be in the history of the Yanling civilization, the greatest first-generation hero king, Gilgamesh. Future generations will write songs of praise for you.
Glory for thousands of years after death, living in the epics, passed down by word of mouth. That is not what I want.
Gilgamesh suddenly grew excited. Then what do you want?
I want eternal life, just like yours.
Gilgamesh looked up at the giant towering into the clouds, extremely longing.
I am willing to give up everything. Pay any price, please. Give me the treasure of eternal life.
Hearing this, I was silent. This king, at this very moment, had already obtained almost everything in the world. Glory, power, wealth. Even the world belonged to him, yet he was still not satisfied. I want longevity too. I am terminally ill now, on the verge of death at any time. I deeply envied Gilgamesh's magnificent life. That epic-like chapter of life. Gilgamesh, you are too greedy. The treasure of immortality, I do not have. I calmly looked at this aging king. The birth, aging, sickness, and death of species is a natural law. I cannot alter it. At the end of life, everyone longs to live on. Identity and the status are flattened at this moment. The scales of countless civilizations are crossed. Whether emperors or ants, the scales of countless civilizations are crossed. Whether emperors or ants, ultimately cannot escape turning into dust and bones. I took a deep look at Gilgamesh, and then looked down at the dynasty below with great emotion.
Impossible!
Gilgamesh squeezed out a voice from his hoarse throat, looking at the sacred face surrounded by clouds in the sky.
No, you are lying to me. You can do it.
He looked at me with burning eyes. Towering like a mountain range, a body as robust as a rock. A long span of over 200 years. Even he, who took the blood of strength, had grown old. But time had never on this great giant left any trace. Time seemed like yesterday to him. In his eyes, the giant beast of wisdom was immortal. What mighty power this is. What a coveted, long lifespan. Gilgamesh's lips trembled.
Suddenly looked up and roared. Then, did you come in response to my call? Are you here to witness my death? A humble and pitiful life, shivering and dying of old age.
Gilgamesh, I have come to see you off, and I do not have the ability to extend your lifespan. I am also here to carry out the second handover and warning of civilization. I sighed and continued, stop the slaughter. Your civilization is too brutal and destructive, destroying the surrounding creatures, slaughtering giant beasts in the forest. The continent is being trampled by you. True civilization is not brutal, nor is it barbaric. I demand that you stop the slaughter.
Stop the slaughter!
Although Gilgamesh was old, he was still robust. He suddenly stood up trembling. His eyes seemed to burn with a flame. Growing more and more intense, the white-haired old man took a sudden step forward. Growing more and more intense, the white-haired old man took a sudden step forward.
The slaughter cannot be stopped, and my footsteps cannot be stopped either. Do you know, this sword of rupture you gave me all those years ago seems to hang high above my head. It gave me great power. It gave me great power, but also brought me unparalleled fear. And today, I will personally unsheathe. Sword hanging over my head. Where is the scribe?
The scribe responsible for compiling Genesis stepped forward at the sound.
Record the history of our civilization at this moment. I speak, you write.
The scribe at the red desk silently picked up his quill and spread out a roll of grey beast skin parchment. Please speak, your majesty.
The history of humanity's struggle against nature is a history of courage and hymns. My original intention in ordering the compilation of Genesis was to leave history for future generations. Now let history record my courage at this moment. Let future generations understand the courage of their ancestors in fighting nature.
Gilgamesh took a heavy, ragged breath, his aged body leaning on the sword of rupture as he laughed deeply, then raised his voice.
In the 175th year of the Yan Emperor dynasty, after slaying the strongest legendary giant beast in history, Manhua, the hero King Gilgamesh, who has been crowned for over 100 years, strikes once again with the power of the entire nation, luring the high and mighty giant beast of wisdom to appear, intending to swing his sword and slay the giant beast of wisdom.
I silently looked down upon all of this, my heart filled with complexity and surprise. Last time it was filicide. I silently looked down upon all of this, my heart filled with complexity and surprise. Last time it was filicide. This time he wants to slay a god. But I quickly calmed down. Gilgamesh's actions seemed audaciously bold, but were actually a matter of course. Facing death for the first time. After this hero king survived, he killed his most beloved son with his own hands. Facing death for the second time, he chose to swing his sword at me, who bestowed the 3 treasures of civilization upon him. Perhaps I should have realized from the very beginning, when I among a group of shivering insect apes, chose the brave young insect ape who dared to roar and question the 10,000-foot giant. What it will me, he has never known fear in his life. Now swinging his sword at me is also only natural. This is due to his character. I said with a calm expression, Gilgamesh, I warn you one last time, please stop your adventure. This is barbarism, and not civilization. Your next actions will pay an extremely heavy price.
No price is heavier than death.
Gilgamesh slowly opened his blood-red eyes, as if returning to his youth once again, showing the long-lost hot-blooded madness of his youth.
Just like back then, when I prepared to die, slayed Manhua. Today, I will slay the giant beast of wisdom, steal his civilization, seize his power, and achieve true immortality. I want to lead my people to challenge God.
Gilgamesh let out a powerful roar. This is the first collision between civilizations. A wise civilization challenges another unique giant beast of wisdom.
Even if you once guided our civilization, now you block our progress.
He raised his long sword high. The wild wind whipped his messy silver-white hair, wild and unrestrained, and just then, a distant bell rang out, echoing through the entire royal city. The entire martyr royal city boiled at this instant. An army of hundreds of thousands of people surged out, forming a dense and neat array. I looked at the saints and aside. It turned out that as early as over 10 years ago, Gilgamesh had already prepared to take action against the giant beast of wisdom. Today was merely to lure me out. If I did not agree to his conditions, he would lead men to kill me. Brave and resourceful. From this perspective, he is indeed a great tyrant. At the same time, in the distant giant city on the plains, the grassland barbarian General Landar stood calmly in front of the palace. Even from a great distance, he could still see the giant towering into the clouds. What a grand and colossal perfect life form. While Landar was in shock, his pupils contracted slightly.
It is time to act, if not to find helpers. With His Majesty Gilgamesh's dictatorial arrogance, how could he have given the precious blood of power to others? He did it for this moment from the very beginning.
Landar suddenly drew his long sword, revealing the fierce courage of a grassland barbarian, and shouted loudly,
"Set out! History will remember this great moment. The Yanli dynasty, year 175. The Yanli people will slay the giant beast of wisdom and return drinking the blood of immortality."
And on the divine tree near the royal capital, this ancient tree that once pierced the sky, used to test the 3 treasures of civilization, now had a bustling giant forest city built upon it. At the top of the divine tree, the forest warrior, Li Chidu, leaned on a wooden staff, quietly watching the terrifying giant towering into the clouds in the distance. Several disciples stood quietly behind him. "Teacher, it is time to depart. The promise made to the king should be fulfilled." Someone whispered a reminder.
"No, our Li Chidu giant forest city chooses to do nothing."
Li Chidu sighed. Even looking at the royal city from a great distance, that terrifying giant's majesty, it weighed on his heart so heavily he could barely breathe. Is the teacher afraid? A blunt disciple couldn't help but ask. The 3 most powerful kings of the 3 great royal cities of Yanli, joining forces together, even the legendary wise behemoth,
might not be able to withstand it. I am not afraid. I do not fear death. What I fear is losing something more important than life. Our civilization and wisdom, they make it impossible for me to be like a savage beast and slaughter the wise behemoth that gave us civilization and saved our race. Without gratitude and righteousness, we would be no different from beasts.
The disciples fell silent. Their teacher was one of the 3 strongest rulers of the royal cities. He had accepted the blood of power and survived as a great hero of the forest. But now he had chosen to defy the king's order.
I defied the royal command and refused to go to war. My crime is unforgivable. Cut off my head. If His Majesty, the king, wins, take my head to the royal hall. I am guilty of defying the royal command. With His Majesty's tyrannical rule, I am guilty of defying the royal command. With His Majesty's tyrannical rule, I was bound to die anyway. This was entirely my own idea. Please, Your Majesty, do not let disaster fall upon the royal city. If the wise behemoth wins instead, then take my head and present it to the wise behemoth. Beg the great giant for forgiveness. Let the wise behemoth know that true inheritors of civilization still remain among us. That we are not purely barbaric. Beg him not to wipe out our race completely. Leave us a sliver of hope.
"Teacher, kill me!" Li Chidu stood atop the divine tree and calmly spread his arms. Xuanzhou was silent for a moment, then stilled his heart. Blood blossomed. He personally cut off Li Chidu's head. This forest king, Ichigo, one of the greatest heroes of Yanli civilization, offered no resistance before death. Xuanzhe looked at the head of Likido, at that calm familiar face, and silently wrapped it in animal hide. Suddenly his heart ached. Vaguely, he knew that something immensely important in his life was slowly shattering. Countless arrows rained down from the ground. This was Yanli's finest army, but to me, they were nothing more than a swarm of ants. Their arrows were sharp, but they lacked the strength. Swords and the spears struck my thick jeans, without even touching my skin.
Even the most elite army couldn't pierce his clothes. I should have guessed earlier. My elite army, which conquered the forest and countless beasts before the wise behemoth, was utterly useless.
The moment he finished speaking,
Gilgamesh suddenly leaped. Was utterly useless.
The moment he finished speaking, Gilgamesh suddenly leaped, and in the blink of an eye, darted to my knee. I couldn't help being slightly moved. What incredible speed. For an ant to move like a flea and unleash such terrifying jumping power was truly no simple feat. I swung my hand and slapped down, but unexpectedly, this aged hero king with a sword nimbly dodged it. Gilgamesh kept moving at high speed, nimbly jumping left and right, climbing up my jeans, but his expression was extremely solemn.
Is this the giant beast of wisdom? Just the wind and waves caused by its gestures almost blew me away.
Your Majesty, Landar is here to support you.
The savage general of the grassland, Landar, had also arrived. With a gentle leap, he actually jumped 7 or 8 meters high, climbing up my trouser leg. I reached out to grab Landar, facing the palm as vast as a mountain peak. This grassland king was equally agile. Having fought giant beasts for countless years, he was battle-hardened, possessing extremely strong combat skills, worthy of the title of grassland king. You two are very good, but the test ends here. Saying that, I suddenly extended my palm, striking at Landar. At extreme speed, Landar's face changed drastically, with no time to react at all. He was instantly sent flying backward. The next second, I delivered another quick palm strike, striking at Gilgamesh with unstoppable force.
Damn it. Actually,
Gilgamesh was shocked, able to react for only an instant, swinging an incredibly stunning sword strike. To block in front of him, the palm collided with the sword blade. His entire body was sent flying backward, falling rapidly. With just one move,
he was defeated. I was actually only able to scratch his skin.
Falling rapidly, with just one move,
he was defeated. I was actually only able to scratch his skin.
Gilgamesh, falling to the ground, gave a miserable laugh, spitting out a large amount of blood. I looked at this hero with emotion. Although he was defeated, he showed no fear from beginning to end, even knowing the gap in their strength was like a chasm. Gilgamesh, this complex and powerful man, possessed great personal charm, egotistical and domineering, and arrogantly overbearing. Now that the hero is in his twilight years, it really makes me feel some pity and regret. By the end of his lifespan, I indeed cannot change. Landar was also spitting blood at this moment, his chest heaving violently. He looked at the giant in the sky, with no fear in his eyes either. Prepared for death from the very beginning, Yanli warriors never fear death. He just laughed miserably.
So the gap is actually this big. What on earth are we waging war against?
Do you regret it now? I sighed softly. My body shrouded in golden light. My body was vast, towering into the clouds, like a giant spanning through eternity, mysterious and majestic.
Regret? Number. This is just a choice.
Gilgamesh coughed up blood heavily, and spoke no more. At this moment, the Yanli civilization declared defeat. Before the giant beast of wisdom, failing to challenge such a vast giant, they knew what this meant. An apocalyptic disaster was about to descend. I turned my head to look at the fleeing army. Everywhere were frantic screams of destruction and extinction. The insect apes wailed continuously, laughing wildly in fear and despair. Clearly having gone mad, I never thought of dominating the fates of so many people. Or dominating the rise and fall of the civilization. Unwildly in fear and despair, clearly having gone mad, I never thought of dominating the fates of so many people. Dominating the rise and fall of a civilization. I looked down upon this aging hero king,
and spoke softly. Will we meet our destruction, just as we destroyed countless giant beast races? Will you destroy us?
To avenge them! I quietly looked at him. His civilization was about to perish. Yet at this very moment, there was still no fear. I thought about it, and replied, since you did not heed the advice, I will destroy you. You destroy the ecology of the entire world, and drove too many species to extinction. I cannot allow you to continue multiplying endlessly. Hearing this, Gilgamesh
smiled with relief. Back then, you answered me what civilization is. Can you answer a few more questions for me one last time now?
Our king is actually asking the intelligent giant beast to answer his questions. Everyone around held their breaths, all looking up at the 10,000-foot giant. The air fell silent for a few seconds. The giant beast was also silent. Suddenly, an incredibly deep voice penetrated the vast clouds and fell into the shattered martyr royal city below. State your questions. In an instant, the world seemed to fall into dead silence. The blood-stained earth suddenly fell silent. Countless fleeing soldiers stopped in their tracks, looking back and up
at the giant in the sky. In what way will you destroy us?
I will use water. After thinking for a moment, I calmly added, I will use a massive flood to wash away and submerge the entire civilization, destroying the footprints you once left behind. In an instant, the earth held its breath. Everyone was as silent as cicadas in winter. Wash away and submerge the entire civilization, destroying the footprints you once left behind. In an instant, the earth held its breath. Everyone was as silent as cicadas in winter. The ground is too dirty, full of sinful people, so the intelligent giant beast will use a massive flood to cleanse this land of sinful mortals. But no matter how powerful the intelligent giant beast is, how could it trigger a flood that covers the entire world? This is no longer the power of a giant beast. This is clearly everyone's breathing quickened. Their faces filled with horror. For a moment, they couldn't even think of a word to describe this legendary intelligent giant beast.
The second question. This world has a dome-shaped sky and a flat earth. Why have there never been your footprints? Where on earth did you come from? What kind of existence is the intelligent giant beast? Why did you hand us the spark of civilization? And why did you stop us from slaughtering other races? You said all living beings are equal. The wild species, the intelligent species, and the plants are all equal. Then, to you, what on earth?
Is this land? I lowered my head slightly, looking at this doomed hero king. The giant looked down upon the entire Leishi city. His vast voice reached the earth. This land is a world I created. You are all my people. The wild species, the intelligent species, the plants, all species are my people to me, and therefore, you are all equal. The dead silent air seemed to freeze. The people on the ground all gasped rapidly. His breathing gradually grew louder, turning into rapid gasps, rising and falling. Gilgamesh was also instantly shocked into silence, his face full of disbelief. He suddenly started laughing. The smile gradually widened, eventually turning into a wild, arrogant laugh.
Interesting! Truly too interesting! What on earth are we fighting against? It turns out the legendary giant beast of wisdom was only a giant beast in our minds. He is not a real giant beast. He is the Almighty Lord, who created all things, the Creator who created the world. Such an existence should be called God. On this land, the tribal people never had the concept of God, but now they do. I was once arrogant, naming the book, recording the history of the civilization I created, Genesis, believing I created a civilized world. In fact, the true creator is the giant beast of wisdom. All living beings are his subjects. What a magnificent power!
I actually presumed too. Gilgamesh's voice came to an abrupt halt, followed by laughter soaring into the sky. He laughed more and more wantonly, while my heart fell silent. The towering giant reaching into the clouds stood at the edge of the royal city, quietly watching this laughing. Doomed hero king, I have always had a good temper, naturally tolerating his insolence and wildness before death.
One last question to create our world.
How many days did it take you? Gilgamesh suddenly asked. This question did indeed plunge me into deep thought. Back then, to turn the orchard into a sandbox, I dug up soil.
Gilgamesh suddenly asked.
This question did indeed plunge me into deep thought. Back then, to turn the orchard into a sandbox, I dug up soil and molded mountains and rivers. This square piece of land took a whole week to modify and complete. So I answered truthfully, it took me a full 7 days to create this land.
7 days for God to create all things.
Only 7 days. Gilgamesh was stunned. He crawled and laughed, laughing until tears came out, laughing hysterically. In an instant, he seemed to hear something shattering inside him. It was the sound of a breaking heart. His aloofness and arrogance were shattered to pieces before his death. Nothing is more sorrowful than a dead heart. 7 days. His consciousness blurred completely amidst his laughter. In a daze, he remembered when he was a child, standing on the giant palm, asking this giant his very first question. What is civilization? Civilization is the spark. It is knowledge, and also order. Civilization is also the strongest power in wisdom used to protect oneself. Gilgamesh's laughter grew louder and louder, passing through the cool breeze and hills, passing through rivers and forests. On this land, all members raised their heads in a daze, as if they all heard the twilight elegy of this king of Yanli. Countless people wept and wailed, singing an unknown Yanli elegy, a tragic folk song, the fall of a great king. On this day, at the edge of the martyr royal city, a generation of the great epic hero King Gilgamesh thus reached the end of his life, becoming dust of history. I sigh, watching this hero king depart. I had never thought of competing for anything. What you want? The questions you want to ask, I have answered them all truthfully. It is indeed that I do not have the ability to grant you immortality. I myself am even on the verge of death. Why do you bother? The king is dead. Our king, the strongest hero king in history, Gilgamesh. He swung his sword at the creator. He is dead. We are defeated. Countless insect apes are wailing and fleeing in panic. I silently look down upon all of this. Where else can these insect apes flee to? The edge of the world. Incredible. Truly incredible. The historian Baiming stood on the towering walls of the martyr's royal city, watching the great hero king suffer defeat and die. Learning the terrifying truth, he broke out in a cold sweat. I must Before I die, record everything. I want to leave the truth about the world to future generations. The historian trembled all over. Sweat soaked his arms. He had only just recorded Gilgamesh's feat of challenging the giant beast of wisdom, and then tremblingly opened the book. Quickly recording a new chapter on the next page. Genesis, the Yanli Kingdom chapter records. The giant beast of wisdom is actually the creator. Gilgamesh was arrogant in his later years, attempting to swing his sword at the Lord to gain eternal life with the blood of God. Ultimately, angering the heavenly God, God saw that the wickedness of man on earth was great, and resolved to destroy the Yanli civilization, sending a world-destroying great flood to destroy all living things. The sky is shaking. The ground is wailing. In the anxious atmosphere of the royal city, people are in a state of panic. Trembling, panicking, and boiling with fear. Repent. God will bring punishment upon our arms, crushing our spines. The great flood will destroy our world, destroy our civilization. And just at this moment, a blond young man carrying a bundle came to my feet. He opened the bundle, revealing the head inside, and said aloud, "The great giant beast of wisdom, Forest King Liquidu." Begs for forgiveness. I was slightly taken aback. Of the 3 kings, only 2 came. The Forest King has not come yet. Shenzi knelt down and pleaded,
clinging tightly to the ground. We Yanli people are not just savage. My mentor Liquidu has already proven this with his own death, preferring to disobey the decree, rather than swing his sword at the benefactor who gave us civilization. We are not entirely evil. When God sends down divine punishment, please leave a last glimmer of hope for the Yanli people.
Hearing of this Forest King's righteous act, I sighed. In fact, I never expected Gilgamesh to be so crazy. Nor did I ever intend to exterminate them. It is just that they were too presumptuous and self-righteous. Such crazy challenge and insolence, tyranny and savagery must ultimately pay the price for their actions. Take your people and build an ark from the giant's divine tree, and of every living creature on earth. Keep at least 1 pair. With the remaining space, board the ship with the righteous people gathered from Liquidu's forest. I will immediately send a great flood to destroy the world. I turned and left. All around was the sound of trembling and excitement. We are defeated, but it was not complete annihilation. Sparks of hope were still left behind. Thanks to the Creator's mercy. It was all because of the Forest King, Liquidu, who showed our goodwill to the Lord. We are not barbaric. We still have a place for redemption. We are not barbaric. We still have a place for redemption. Praise Liquidu. Praise the great Forest King. Historian Baiming also wept with joy, looking at the giants departing back, wielding his brush. Recorded in the Genesis, Yanli Kingdom chapter. The benevolence of Liquidu, the Forest King, moved the god who was prepared to destroy the world, leaving a chance of survival for the Yanli people who dared to defy God. God commanded Shrens to build an ark to escape the world-destroying great flood. I went back to the yard and tidied up a bit, finding in the corner of the garden, with the neighbor's sister, Su Jing, the high-pressure water gun bought while shopping a while ago. I didn't expect it to come in handy so soon. In the mere 10-odd minutes I spent preparing the water gun, 120 days had passed in the sandbox. Countless people turned into accelerated after images, chopping down the bonsai sacred tree left behind back then, to build a giant ark, bringing along the seeds of all living things, cubs of various giant beasts, the species of the entire world, all condensed in this giant ark. Fortunately, the place is not big, and they live quite concentrated. Time to start washing. I walked into the sandbox from a distance of over 10 meters, raised the high-pressure water gun, sweeping and washing all the way through. The snow-white high-pressure water stream sprayed towards the city-state civilization area in the orchard. Large swathes of trees fell. The giant city collapsed in an instant. Countless beasts fled the forest, trying to outrun the towering white flood behind them, but were ultimately submerged. The sky and the earth seemed to change color in an instant. Snow-white and vast. Shenzi led everyone sitting on the ark, looking at the sky in shock. It was an incredibly shocking scene, as if the fountains of the great deep burst forth. Looking at the sky in shock, it was an incredibly shocking scene, as if the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of heaven were opened. Countless snow-white rushing streams poured down from the clouds, washing over the entire land, except for the ark still floating on the sea. The entire world was already submerged in the vast white spray. The giant flood, like a grand white waterfall, poured down from the peak of the high sky amidst the rushing waters, submerging mountains, rivers, and the earth. What a terrifying, great power, bringing down a world-destroying flood in an instant. On the deck, merchants, nobles, commoners, and slaves, all sighed in shock. They were the kindest and the most harmonious group of people. God sent the flood to cleanse the sinful land. Those who were barbaric, tyrannical, and guilty would all be drowned in the flood. On this day, the great flood destroyed the world, known as the Day of Disaster, the final afterglow of the Yanli civilization. Shenzi led the remaining Yanli people on the ark, boarding the final ark. To escape the great flood, the unmanned vessel, with the historian Baiming holding a quill in the corner, slumped on the deck in embarrassment, still immersed in that great and miraculous figure. Our world has a round sky and a square earth. Our world was created by God. In just 7 days. What a magnificent power this is. Baiming, With trembling hands, tears in his old cloudy eyes, he began to use his own thoughts to silently complete the 7 days of God's creation, taking up his pen to write the last of Genesis, the record of God's 7 days of creation. On the first day, God said, "Let there be light." And there was light, separating the light from the darkness, calling the light day, calling the darkness night. On the second day, God said, "Let there be an expanse between the waters to separate them," separating the light from the darkness, calling the light day, calling the darkness night. On the second day, God said, "Let there be an expanse between the waters to separate them." And there was the sky. On the third day, God said, "Let the water under the sky be gathered to one place, and let dry ground appear." So the water and dry ground were separated. God called the dry ground land, and the gathered waters he called seas. The fourth day, the fifth day, the sixth day, the sixth day. Thus, the heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array. God rested, and on this day he blessed the previous 6 days. In the days that followed, people took the imagination of this historian as the truth, as if the created God had indeed before mortals elaborated in detail on his 7 days of creation. But how could God lower himself to explain in detail to humble subjects how he created the world? Yet people prefer to believe this story. In the story, God rested on the 7th day. People called this day the day of rest, the holy day. Thus, the custom of this land was formed. People would also choose to rest on this day. After washing for quite a while, and making sure nothing was missed, did he stop the high-pressure water gun, silently turned off the switch, and put it back in the utility room. In this way, it is a fresh start again. The endless slaughter of the insect apes and overpopulation had almost broken the sandbox. Now, leaving one pair of each species, it will eventually restore to the previous ecosystem. Hopefully, after this time, they will be more vigilant. The creator mind said from the side, even if we don't destroy them, they will destroy themselves, eat up all species, and then perish themselves. It is better to welcome a new life ahead of time now. I let out a long sigh of relief. I am not as fragile as you think. No need for comfort. It is just that I feel a bit bad in my heart. I let out a long sigh of relief. I am not as fragile as you think. No need for comfort. It is just that I feel a bit bad in my heart. The creator mind continued, saying as the brood mother queen, Top Joy produces countless subjects and races. You are the great creator. You should get used to the rise and extinction of countless races. Veins popped on my forehead, correcting it. Needless to say, I am male. I am the brood mother queen. Needless to say, they are all spores you reproduced one by one. Anyway, family planning for the insect apes is very important. I immediately interrupted him, and sat on the chair at the courtyard entrance, silently munching on the freshly peeled fruit. I will go to town tomorrow to buy another 2 gin of fruit. With stomach cancer, I need to treat my stomach a bit better. For the first time in a while, I picked up the black notebook to write in it. This is the era of giant beasts. I originally wanted to call this era the Beastaceous period, corresponding to the Cretaceous period of the dinosaur era. But since the Yanli people recorded it as Genesis, I might as well just call this era Genesis. On Earth's timeline, the horizontal comparison is the mass extinction at the end of the Cretaceous period, where meteorites fell to destroy the dinosaurs, whereas here, the Great Flood fell to destroy the giant beasts and insect apes. In my history of evolution, it will be called the Genesis mass extinction. I organized my thoughts, turned to the 4th page after the Anwu Guangwu and Cenozoic eras, and wrote down the 4th era Genesis. Intelligent species appeared. The insect ape clan developed the tribal city-state civilization. The insect ape clan developed the tribal city-state civilization, expelling the giant beasts and becoming the overlords of this era. Yet they were cruel and violent. Heaven could not tolerate this, sending a great flood to destroy all living beings. The 3rd mass extinction broke out, wiping out 99% of all living things. After recording the 3rd mass extinction, I went to sleep. The next morning, while washing my face and brushing my teeth, I felt my whole body filled with a terrifying boiling power. Spreading within, I was suddenly startled, and quickly began to examine my own body structure. This power... I looked at myself in the mirror. My original height had shot up by a few centimeters out of nowhere, reaching 1.83 meters. My facial features became gentle and handsome, with an elegant and deep temperament. My physique was robust and solid, similar to the perfect physique in Greek sculptures, muscular when undressed, slim when dressed. This is the power returned to me by the 3rd mass extinction. Compared to the first 2 times, it is countless times stronger. I am now comparable to some top athletes. I clenched my fists, feeling a surge of explosive power. But this handsome look and body proportion already make me look like a perfect Norse god. Instead, I felt a headache coming on, changing like this all of a sudden. As Eugene is probably going to go crazy, she will definitely scold me, asking what kind of photo editing hat I bought. I am doomed. I am going to be studied by people. Can I modify my genes? I suddenly asked the creator mind to modify these express genes for good looks back to normal. This kind of perfect appearance is way too exaggerated and eye-catching. Walking down the street, it is the kind that would make countless people scream. To be honest, my previous appearance was already very satisfactory. Getting Su-Ching and the neighborhood aunties in the village to accept it was already hard enough. Now changing again and again.
I am afraid they will become completely suspicious. The creator possesses the natural ability to unlock gene locks, and as the Zerg hero, can modify their own gene segments.
Would you like to integrate Zerg cells? I am already a Zerg hero. Actually, my body was too weak before to undergo the modification. Now that my physique is strong, I can accept the Zerg cells. I didn't spend too much time hesitating on the choice of whether to remain human. After all, if I lose my life, nothing else matters. Now that my physique is strong, can I accept the Zerg cells? I didn't spend much time waiting on the choice of whether to remain human. My life is almost gone, silently waiting to die of cancer. Being a normal person isn't exciting at all. How interesting it is to be a bug. So I silently said, integrate Zerg cells. Fusion begins. Instantly, a tearing sharp pain came from the depths of my soul, Cold sweat broke out all over my body, falling onto the bed, wailing in pain, and then passed out. By the time I came to, 3 hours had already passed. Covered in blackish grey grime, I quickly took a shower, changed my clothes, before coming back to check on myself. My body has become different, filled with infinite potential. I am already a real bug, possessing the Zerg talent of accelerated cell division. My body can regulate genes at will. I closed my eyes slightly, and in the black space, saw a twisted double helix DNA. In the human genes, large chunks of useless, junk information fragments have been cleared and optimized, leaving only the essence. Most of the gene chain is blank, but when I try to eliminate the cancer cells, the creation mind sent a cold reply. Fundamental genetic component cannot be eliminated. I took a deep breath. There is no way to eliminate human genes, so I can only find a way to cure it. Furthermore, the creation mind told me a terrifying fact. Cancer cells are the body's rebellious cells. The stronger a person becomes, the stronger the cancer cells become. Which means, as I grow stronger, the cancer cells also grow stronger, multiplying frantically inside my body. During this mass extinction, if I absorbed a little more power, I might have died directly. I couldn't help but be startled. For a short time, I cannot accept the power feedback. From the fourth mass extinction again, I took a deep breath and stayed alert. In other words, within a short period, even if they act wantonly and brutally on this land, I cannot just wipe them out in large numbers. I took a deep breath and stayed alert. In other words, within a short period, even if they act wantonly and brutally on this land, I cannot just wipe them out in large numbers. To reshuffle the deck, I thought of Gilgamesh's madness and struggle before death last night, which also brought me a sense of terror and awe towards death. My stomach cancer has progressed from mid-stage to late stage. Death is what any living creature fears the most. Can I really survive? Standing up, I walked towards the courtyard gate. Late stage cancer. Time left for me is running out. I must, as soon as possible in the next era, deduce ritual civilizations in a large sandbox, and deduce extraordinary powers, finding within the extraordinary abilities that can modify or combat cancer cells. I looked at the sandbox, where all things were withered, almost no signs of life. A night passed, equivalent to 40 or 50 years in the sandbox, but it hasn't fully recovered yet. Only one pair of each species was brought, to slowly reproduce again, and they also began to obey God's warning. All living beings are equal, except for necessary food. Reduce unnecessary killing, and even help reproduce some species, to expand the population. Meanwhile, after the mass extinction, various new species vaguely emerged again. All kinds of strange things, looking like new sprouts after a grey world, has already stabilized and started to develop again, but it is still too slow. My illness won't last long. I sighed. Should I open a second sandbox? To start a new genesis, I want to open a new world sandbox for evolution, to let the civilization inside develop an extraordinary system, but it is obviously a bit unrealistic. After all, the large sandbox in front of me has only just sprouted extraordinary power, biting off more than one can chew. So I changed my way of thinking. Wisdom is impermanent, which will lead to many things that contradict the theory of evolution. Since that is the case, perhaps I should borrow other people's wisdom. Me thinking hard, all by myself, is too limited, which will lead to many things that contradict the theory of evolution. Since that is the case, perhaps I should borrow other people's wisdom. Me thinking hard, all by myself, is too limited. Why not brainstorm and drag a bunch of people into this? That is right. This time, I want to bet big. Evolving species by myself is too slow. Might as well bring others in to help me deduce spore evolution together. I thought of a sandbox game I used to play. Spore. Players start evolving and reproducing from spores, and eventually become various creatures. If I make a miniature sandbox, can it be made like an online game, where others enter through devices? Treating the sandbox as a game, to evolve new species for me, with the Zerg technology. It can naturally be done, but it can't achieve killing monsters to level up. I know this wasn't a game in the first place. It is the real world. I plan to make it, like Minecraft. An open sandbox for the players, enabling 10,000 times acceleration of cell division, letting them start from the spore state to evolve species themselves. They control it themselves. Cell division, growth, evolution, dying of old age, evolving new species, finishing a round of spore evolution in 2 or 3 days. This is just a small design from a sudden whim. It won't take too much energy. The main core is still the big sandbox side. I will select, in each of their game sessions, the most unique and most potential races to add to the big sandbox, to improve the sandbox world.
After all,
having only the insect of ape as the intelligent race is too monotonous. I already know. A single dominant intelligent race. It is very easy to destroy the sandbox. How many days will this take to get done? About 3 days. With current technology, existing VR gaming glasses can serve as a medium. So in front of the house door, I created a small 30 square meter sandbox, swung the hole according to the previous layout. Familiar with the path, I created the sandbox environment. My body felt better, although I still have a terminal illness, but I have energy to work. 1 day later, familiar with the path, I created the sandbox environment. My body felt better, although I still have a terminal illness, but I have energy to work. 1 day later, a person named Chen Wenshan, a veteran player on platform, while searching for niche new games, discovered this VR game, Spore Evolution Beta. The description read, sandbox farming game. Start with a single spore, species evolution, infinite possibilities. The first choice for casual players. At first, he scoffed at it, thinking it was just another domestic game developer trying to grab attention, but actually, the huge size of 3G made him a bit curious. After downloading and registering, put on VR glasses and enter the game. How is this possible? There is actually physical sensation. It feels like I am really swimming in the ocean. Chen Wenshan's mind instantly went blank, knowing he had touched upon something unimaginable. But upon entering the game, nothing could be seen, because he was still in a spore state, a single-celled organism, needing to evolve first, eyes and a visual system. He died countless times, reproducing generation after generation. Finally, evolved eyes, then grew a mouth and started preying, but soon went extinct. The eyes were too weak, often failing to see enemies and getting ambushed. For this reason, he even ran to the library to look up biological evolution materials. Half a day later, he finally evolved a species that could barely survive. Countless slimy tentacles surrounding a huge single eye, with a small mouth full of fangs underneath.
I finally succeeded!
Chen Wenshan was filled with a sense of achievement, controlling his tentacle monster to crawl ashore, shocked by the realistic scenery of mountains and rivers. As for me, sitting at the courtyard door, eating an apple and sunbathing, looking at the bizarre species crawling ashore in the distance, I was instantly dumbfounded. What kind of weird evolved species is this? The eyes are terrifyingly big, taking up 2/3 of the body. How deep is the obsession with growing eyes? What kind of weird evolved species is this? The eyes are terrifyingly big, taking up 2/3 of the body. How deep is the obsession with growing eyes? According to the theory of evolution, evolving most nutrients into useless eyeballs will definitely be eliminated by nature. But then I found it very interesting. Doesn't this look like the mythical evil eye monster? At this moment, a knocking sound came from the door. As Soqing came to deliver food, I stood up and walked towards the door, just in time to step on and kill this evil eye monster, squished, turning it into a lump of mud. On Chen Wenshan's side, the word failed appeared again, instantly looking completely bewildered. He was evolving just fine, and finally became a decent species, just crawled ashore to rule the world. How did he suddenly get stabbed to death? And as I opened the door, Soqing brought delicious food again.
She peered into the yard.
Why? Are you farming all by yourself?
And farming so happily. It is alright. Farming makes me happy. She stared at me blankly, as if shocked. How could you? I always feel your aura has changed, become so charismatic. You really used cheats, didn't you? Although I changed my appearance back, but after experiencing 3 mass extinctions, that superhuman aura is hard to change. I just touched her forehead. Are you sick? She was forcefully fooled.
And could only change the subject. By the way, aren't you bored in the yard?
Do you want to go shopping with me occasionally? I looked at her, stunned.
Are you serious? Where is your previous girlfriend?
How come I haven't seen her accompanying you? We broke up. We broke up after I got sick and resigned.
So you got a terminal illness at your peak, lost your job, and your girlfriend left you, leaving you to return to the countryside to spend the rest of your life alone.
That is quite pitiful. I can be your girlfriend to accompany you before you die. Consider it fulfilling my childhood wish. I've been a volunteer and am very good at taking care of terminally ill patients. I can cook for you, and am very good at taking care of terminally ill patients. I can cook for you, go shopping and chat with you, to make you happier before you pass away.
Before I passed away, I was instantly speechless, and then looked at her with a half smile. Are you serious? To fulfill the duties of a girlfriend? As Liu Qing shuddered, hurriedly took a few steps back.
Covering her clothes. This is just a pure relationship. You're already dying. And yet, you still want to ruin my purity? People talk about superficial brothers.
So, we'll just be superficial lovers. Okay.
I was quite straightforward. Then, in a few days, there is a high school class reunion during summer break. Do you come with me? You look good. Bringing you along will definitely make me look good. My friends will be green with envy. Come choose clothes with me. Anyway, you are free on weekdays and still have some spare money. Since you still have time now, why not indulge and spend it with me?
Confirmed by the look in her eyes, I've fallen into a trap. This girl came to me just because she is short of money for clothes, and needs a boyfriend to show up. Getting a superficial girlfriend out of nowhere is like getting an extra little housekeeper. This girl only has a fleeting interest, but she can carefully prepare meals every day, so I don't have to go to the county town to eat so often. After all, stomach cancer requires attention to diet. Things outside are too dirty. Back to business. I studied that evil eye creature, although I stepped on and killed one, but the population is still in the small sandbox. Now they are on the verge of extinction. After all, 2/3 of their body size is just eyeball, destined to be eliminated by nature. Do they have the potential of an extraordinary species?
The creature's thinking is simple. I make it evil. That's because of the huge eyeball.
Its mental power is surprisingly strong. If left alone, it will definitely go extinct. But maybe it is just like the insect ape. Just too weak in the early stages. Once developed, it might become powerful. I plan to introduce this species to the large sandbox, to create a swamp in the 100-acre sandbox, using chicken manure and cow dung to pave a fertile, rotting mudland. In the future, biogas will be born with microbial fermentation, completely turning into a sticky, muddy swamp, and then directly put the evil eye creatures in there to survive. There is no competition here. No matter how weak, they can breed in large numbers. As for whether they can become the first extraordinary monster later on, it depends on themselves. Meanwhile, on the small sandbox side, the game completely blew up. The first player, Chen Winshan posted a detailed review on the forum. Potent core content is 100% realistic touch. Whatever creature you evolve into, you feel it. Death only means creating a new account. There are absolutely no walkthroughs to speak of. He even wrote at the end of the review, my goal is to evolve into a legendary dragon, and then fly to that yard to poop on the head of the giant peeling apples. Want to poop on my head? For a species that dares to provoke me like that, do you know what their end will be? I silently noted down this stat in my heart. In just one short day, 1.100 in just one short day, the 100 slots for the small sandbox were fully booked. Tens of thousands of people online signed a petition demanding more beta slots. Think there are too few slots? What does that have to do with me? I don't make money from you by making games. Feel free to raise suggestions, but I lose if I adopt them. I am too lazy to expend it. It was originally just a small design. It is useless, even if you make a big fuss to have it, unless there is an unexpected surprise. Otherwise, it will remain in closed beta forever. Focus attention back on the large sandbox. This is the real work. The Yanli people of the previous era. Strictly speaking, only 3 extraordinary creatures like Gilgamesh appear. The next civilization, I want them to develop an extraordinary, mature cultivation system, preferably evolving into a wizard civilization. Previously, Gilgamesh once invited court dark wizards to study longevity potions. That was the prototype of a wizard. I hope a great wizard will emerge, skilled in alchemy and potions, to create something that can cure cancer. In order to establish a complete extraordinary system, it is indispensable in the sandbox to have various mysterious and dangerous extraordinary species. As research materials for the wizards, I looked at the swampy mud in the large sandbox. A day has passed. The evil eyes have already bred in large numbers, and even evolved special individuals. I was slightly delighted. Over the past 100 years, due to the lack of natural predators in the new environment, the evil eyes spread crazily everywhere. But soon, due to overbreeding, internal competition pressure increased. Food became scarce. They began to kill each other, feeding on their own kind. Gradually, a unique evil eye appeared. It possessed a strange mental power. Any creature it stared at would be charmed, obediently walking to it to become food. This first-generation transcendent evil eye quickly rose to the top, becoming the overlord of the swamp ecosystem, with no natural enemies. It reproduced frantically. Survival of the fittest. Ordinary evil eyes were soon slaughtered in large numbers. The entire swamp was filled with charming, capable, evil eye offspring. The transcendent species had finally appeared. Violent mental power. I shuddered slightly. Not until after the 4th epoch did the first transcendent species finally emerge. Just then, I looked at the giant sandbox, and surprisingly, another dramatic event was unfolding. A group of insects had already stepped into that muddy swamp. More than 200 years had passed. Several generations since the Great Deluge, the successors of the Yanli tribe, after wearing animal skins and clothes, no longer needed thick natural hair for warmth. Their black body hair gradually decreased. Their thin outer exoskeleton disappeared. Their bodies began to stand straight, revealing snow-white skin. From hairy apes, they evolved into sparsely haired subhumans, their physique closer and closer to that of rugged and strong Westerners. They once possessed a glorious city-state civilization, but now, they still remained in simple farming tribes. Their glory was all built upon the foundation of the hero king Gilgamesh. That great hero king suppressed the world's giant beasts single-handedly, putting the Yanli race at the top of the food chain. But without the hero king, they had nothing. Unable to develop into the Bronze and Iron Ages, relying on crude stone spears and clubs, how could they fight against giant beasts? The only sacred sword of civilization, the Sword of Rupture, EA, had already, along with Gilgamesh, sunk forever into the endless deep sea of the world-destroying deluge. At this time, Muj, the daughter of the Babylon tribe chief, was sighing.
The Yanli was truly splendid. It was an epic era belonging to one person, the great hero King Gilgamesh. No wonder the people of that time wrote epics for him, to record his glory. Our era has declined, and is heading toward decay. If the God-given sword of civilization hadn't been lost, even without the great power of the blood of strength, we might not have had such a hard time. Civilization is the power that protects us intelligent species. I, Muj, want to know the path forward for our civilization.
How on earth should we survive? Muj looked calm. She was the bravest and wisest person in the tribe. Her strength was inferior to men's, but her killing skills allowed her to defeat most warriors in the tribe. She looked at the few strong men in animal skins beside her.
How is the exploration of this area going?
The surrounding area is a swamp. A warrior answered, this is a vast muddy swamp, likely formed by accumulated puddles after the Great Deluge, and the species are thriving inside. There are many delicious fruits. This is where I used chicken manure and cow dung to pave a fertile swampland. Natural plants grow more vigorously. Milch took a deep breath, looking at the vast black mud pit in front of her. Just as she was planning to, listed this place as the tribe's next gathering point.
She suddenly realized something was wrong. Wait.
2 people are missing. Everyone looked at each other.
This had never happened before. Something is wrong. The giant beast's massive size cannot step into the swamp. it would only sink. There are no traces of giant beasts. It could only be that small swamp creatures
are secretly attacking us. Moj made a prompt decision, leading more than 20 people to evacuate. But just then, in the swamp mud, suddenly appeared, disgusting and bizarre grayish-black tentacle monster. Its body covered in tentacles like gray seaweed, surrounding a huge, bloodshot, crimson eyeball, occupying 2/3 of its body. So beautiful. How could there be such a beautiful girl in this world? Several strong men in animal skins suddenly locked eyes with the evil eye's charming, bloodshot eye, as if they saw a peerless beauty, so excited that no one could hold them back.
and walked over fanatically.
What are you doing? Don't go over there.
Moj instantly sensed something. Those sinister giant eyeballs could actually charm prey into approaching them voluntarily. The two missing people were probably walking into a trap.
Walking towards their death, she made a prompt decision to abandon the charmed people, and lead the rest to escape quickly. But just then, she suddenly stopped.
Her gaze growing passionate. What a marvelous creature. They are even weaker than us. Weak, soft tentacles, and a foolish giant eyeball, yet possessing a terrifying, incredible power. Capable of destroying creatures much stronger than themselves. Aren't we just as weak? Why do only they possess it?
Such a unique power. In Mildred's eyes, an unnamed torch seemed to be burning. A terrifying thought awakened in her heart. I want to seize its power.
To revitalize the tribe. Kill it.
And then we escape. Everyone was shocked. She turned back and raised her white stone spear high. A ray of light shed from the sky, falling on her beautiful and cold face, like the goddess of war in Norse mythology.
Kill it with me. I want to bring its corpse.
Back to the tribe. But more of these creatures are approaching us. Someone roared. Looking deep into the black swamp, more giant-eyed tentacle monsters were wriggling their slimy tentacles and crawling slowly. Although their movements were ridiculously slow, their bizarre power was terrifying to the extreme.
Once surrounded by these giant eyeballs, even at the cost of death.
We must kill one. Mildred raised her stone spear, becoming the bravest warrior of the tribe. Charged straight up, with just one spear, accompanied by a baby like, crying like shock and the whole scream. That fragile big eyeball quickly exploded. The stench of blood filled the air, but just at this moment, she suddenly stopped in her tracks.
Her gaze grew passionate. What a wonderful creature this is. They, compared to us, are even weaker, powerless, soft tentacles, foolish, giant eyeballs, yet possess terrifying and incredible power, capable of destroying creatures stronger than themselves. Aren't we just as weak? Why is it only they possess
a unique power? In Mildred's eyes, as if a nameless torch was burning. A terrifying thought awakened in her heart. I want to seize its power.
To revitalize the tribe. Kill it.
And then we will flee. Everyone was shocked. She turned back and raised the white stone spear high. A ray of light shed from the sky, falling on her beautiful and cold face, like the goddess of war in Norse mythology.
Follow me to kill it. I will take its corpse.
Back to the tribe. But more of these creatures are approaching us. Someone roared. Looking deep into the black swamp, more big-eyed tentacle monsters were wriggling their slimy tentacles, crawling slowly. Although their movements were ridiculously slow, their hairy power was terrifying to the extreme.
Once surrounded by these big eyeballs, even at the cost of death.
We must kill one. Mildred lifted the stone spear, incarnating as the tribe's bravest warrior, charged straight up, with just one spear, accompanied by a baby like, crying like shock and hoarse scream. That fragile big eyeball quickly exploded. The stench of blood filled the air, turning into disgusting slimy fluid,
splattering onto Mildred's face.
Go quickly. She lifted the corpse's slimy tentacle with one hand, quickly turned her head, only to find they were surrounded by 7 or 8 evil eyes.
Her face turned pale.
Fight our way out with me. This was a tragic and fierce fight. Almost all of the nearly 30-person hunting team died. They could have run away, but because they delayed, they were surrounded. In the end, only 3 survivors escaped this demon swamp that seemed cursed by death. Everyone is dead. Mildred, this extremely strong woman, could not help but cry tears. These years, the brave men of the tribe mostly died hunting giant beasts. The tribe of nearly 1,000 people had only 100 strong men left. Now they lost another third.
They were almost facing extinction. However, our race will die sooner or later anyway.
We might as well give it our all. Mildred took a deep breath,
looking at a corpse of the evil eye, hoping this creature brought back at a huge cost.
Its evil blood would be useful. Over the years, countless people tried to fuse various giant beast blood, hoping to be like Gilgamesh, possessing the power of the Hero King, but except for the blood of power granted by God, all of them are dead. It seems only the blood of special creatures makes it possible.
Perhaps the blood of these special creatures
can become another kind of blood of power. When Moj brought the remaining few people back to the tribe, her father had already collapsed. Are you crazy? Do you know what you are doing? A middle-aged, sturdy man dressed in black animal hide gasped heavily on the high ground. Are you crazy? Do you know what you are doing? The middle-aged, sturdy man dressed in black animal hide gasped heavily on the high ground.
I am not crazy. We have no way back. Instead of waiting for death, we might as well fight to the death to bring forth another second Gilgamesh to guide our civilization towards glory.
This is our only way to avoid extinction. That is impossible. The chief shook his head slowly. Only the legendary God-given blood of power can bring great power. Not to mention this kind of disgusting monster, even if we successfully obtain that power.
The gods will punish us. Power itself has no good or evil. Possessing the bright and great blood of power could also lead to becoming a tyrant, wielding the holy sword of civilization, to challenge the Almighty God while possessing dark power. If one maintains a kind heart, it is not impossible to protect the people. This kind of monster is weaker than us, yet possesses inconceivable power.
If we could possess the same power. The chief fell silent, gasped heavily. This will be a decision more important than one's own death. He suddenly looked down at his stubborn daughter, and choked out. But we no longer have enough people to test it. For 200 years, generations of brave and resourceful chiefs have let young people try to integrate the giant beast's blood, dying generation after generation without regard for themselves, which has led to this sparse population.
Milch took a deep breath. We do not have enough strong men, but we have enough of the elderly, weak, women, and children. All these years, it has always been the men protecting the women. This time, it is the women's turn to step forward. If a large number of women die, it is the women's turn to step forward. And if a large number of women die, we will have fewer burdens. This time,
let those of the tribe go to their deaths. The tent fell deathly silent instantly. Half a day later, a blazing torch burned on the high ground of the tribe.
Muj gathered all the people. If we do not want to go towards extinction, if we hope to restore the glory of the Yanli people, if we hope for the next great hero king to appear, death cannot crush our arms. The great hero King Gilgamesh once said, "The history of humanity's struggle against nature is a history of courage and hymns. And today, history will record our courage on this day. Tomorrow morning, we hope you will come for the tribe." The hymn of humanity
is a hymn of courage. Below, the women held their children in their arms in silence. Everyone knew clearly there was basically no possibility of survival. On this night, countless women said goodbye to their husbands and children, and after weeping bitterly, resolutely chose the test. After countless days and nights, their husbands died, their fathers died, and their sons would also die in the future. What did they have left? They only had themselves left. There was no one left to protect them. Only they themselves could protect them. This day was destined to be stained with blood and cruelty. Countless women resolutely stepped forward to try and fuse with the blood of the evil eye. Over 400 people in total. Bodies littered the field. Everywhere were painful and distorted corpses, but those who survived in the end were surprisingly 3 women, Muj, and 2 others named Circe and Frostchant. The 3 of them were permanently frozen on the ancient stone wall. Were surprisingly 3 women, Muj, and 2 others named Circe and Frostchant. The 3 of them were permanently frozen on the ancient stone wall. On the Babylonian murals, amid the painful pool of blood of countless women, only 3 strong women bathed in blood, standing upon the corpses, the 3 of them in a circle, holding up high together, a giant burning torch. Later generations called this sacred ancient mural. The 3 witches, they passed on the spark of civilization. In the days that followed, these 3 great and resolute women helped the tribal civilization forward once again. They began to possess a strange spiritual power. Powerful and sharp, mysterious and evil, just like the evil eye. They gradually gained the ability to resist giant beasts, using their minds to interfere with the beasts from the rear, while warriors with stone axes fought at the front. But their powerful spiritual power also made them frequently unable to control its fluctuations, and even when getting close to men, accidentally due to excitement and arousal, would cause the other's mind to collapse and die from the shock. Therefore, they were all chaste women, unable to get along with men, lonely and proud, with no one daring to approach them. Milch possessed a strong sense of honor and mission, leading the tribe to war, resisting giant beasts with the wooden staff. Frosthunt was easygoing and gentle, liking to lead the women in herding, planting herbs, and healing the people. Circe, however, was an exception. She was originally a married woman who accidentally killed her husband while being intimate with him, but she had extremely strong desires, having tasted the sweetness of it, secretly, using mental charm like the evil eye, while the men of the tribe, indulging in intimacy, yet unable to stop herself from often killing them. Mysterious deaths of men began to occur in the tribe. People cursed Circe in secret, but Circe held a grudge, using her spiritual power to curse those men who resisted her, causing them splitting headaches and dark circles around their eyes. The witch Circe gradually became in the tribe a synonym for evil and terror. The other 2 could not dissuade her, nor could they work together to kill her, because they needed her power to protect the tribe. Due to Circe's tyranny, the status of women became exalted. The 3 of them were called witches in the tribe, symbolizing strength, evil, mystery, fear, Omnipotence. From this day on, the tribe entered the era of witches ruled by women. According to the records of the Spear of Grand Witches, the Babylon tribe suffered from a beast disaster. Men were scarce, women consumed the blood of the evil eye, and the great three witches appeared. Curse and Curse Melch the War Witch, and Curse Melch the War Witch, in charge of chaotic war and glory. Cersei the Curse Witch, in charge of chaotic desire and curses. Shang Yin, the Spring Witch, in charge of occult medicine and herding. Witches, I laughed, silently waited for more than 3 days, which is more than 300 years in their world. Finally, in the lingering survival of the Great Flood, traces of revival appeared. Someone who integrated the second gene actually appeared. They chose the evil eye. Gilgamesh integrated the second gene, the termite gene, possessing infinite strength, and this group of women called witches integrated the evil eye gene, possessing mental power, if not for that evil eye species, as the first extraordinary species. Appearing in the sandbox, I am afraid it would never become the trigger for the extraordinary path. Evil eye, big-eyed monster, good stuff, gave me such a big surprise. I sat at the courtyard entrance, munching on an apple, as expected, thinking heart alone is too difficult. Pulling wisdom, drawing on the wisdom of others. Actually, the termite gene is too strong, drawing on the wisdom of others. Actually, the termite gene is too strong. The blank gene segment required is too large. It is hard for normal people to have such a large blank gene segment, while the evil eye gene is relatively much weaker. The required segment is not much, and the probability of birth is also high, with 400 deaths. Only 3 were born, but they are far worse than Gilgamesh. They need the cooperation of warriors to deal with ordinary giant beasts, while Gilgamesh alone could sweep the world. Their use of mental power is very primitive, although they are also researching witchcraft herbs. It is still too slow. I thought about it, returned to the room, and searched for information online. The West has yoga meditation. The East has the visualization of Taoist internal alchemy, both of which train the mind, give the seed of meditation to them, and let them perfect the path of wizard cultivation, the beginning of a path. Crossing the river by feeling the stones, hitting walls everywhere, is too difficult, but once there is a direction, it will inevitably be countless times faster. But how do I go to meet these 3 witches? Incarnating as a giant beast of wisdom, and delivering treasures again, definitely won't work. I can't directly control the miniature creatures in the sandbox to walk for me. While thinking this, I noticed that in the small sandbox, a group of leading hardcore players crawled onto the land. They discovered there really was an incredibly vast giant, sitting on a sky-high chair in the distance, eating an apple. With a thoughtful look, this sandbox game is super interesting. In our setting, it really is. The evolving bugs in the yard. Are they going to fight back against the giant? 3 or 4 oddly shaped players whispering to each other, feeling that the degree of freedom is terrifyingly high. Observing in secret, we are no match for him right now. Don't go near him, in case we get stepped on and die. We won't even have a place to cry. A group of players lying on the trees along the coastline. Observing in secret, in case we get stepped on and die. We won't even have a place to cry. A group of players lying on the trees along the coastline. Observing in secret, pointing fingers at me. A bunch of funny guys. I sat in the yard, watching a bunch of little ants whispering about me in the distance, really treating me like the big boss. Knock, knock, knock. A knock came from the door. Su Qing has come to deliver food. Forget it. Eat first. I stood up. Holy crap, an earthquake. It is just that he stood up. That is all. Run. Don't get stepped on and die. A group of oddly shaped creatures, scurrying away in panic, running wildly on the earth. Behind them, a giant as vast as the clouds, 10,000 feet tall, slowly walking over, crossing 1,000 miles in a single step, easily stepping over their heads, walking into the distance. When he returned, he was carrying a blue lunchbox in his hand, sitting back in the chair to eat. While eating the farmhouse food, I continued to think how to pass the information of meditation to the 3 witches of the Babylon tribe. At this time, the players hiding in the little woods secretly came out again, gathering in a circle. This boss actually has cut scenes. He is eating. Let's lay low and develop first. I watched this group of ants studying how to defeat me, and was suddenly speechless. But suddenly, an idea came to mind. Right, the sandbox game evolution. I can just go through the player channel and evolve from a spore into a microorganism. Then, I can enter the large sandbox. I was incredibly excited. As expected, establishing the small sandbox back then was wise. But to personally enter the field, naturally I have to clear the area first. The next second, an announcement appeared in front of all players. This game is undergoing emergency maintenance. Go offline immediately, 3 seconds. Once the announcement came out, the entire sandbox exploded with chatter. Dog planner, 3 seconds. It's as good as saying nothing. Once the 3 seconds passed, all screens went black. Countless people took off their VR glasses and almost smashed their devices. All screens went black. Countless people took off their VR glasses and almost smashed their devices. They had absolutely no idea that it was precisely because they were messing around in front of me that reminded me of them. If you don't seek death, you won't die. They were frantically cursing the planner on the forum, but it couldn't stop their enthusiasm for the game. Among them, Chen Winshan, the Mount Akina speedster, was still analyzing on the forum how to deal with me. He is eating. We can evolve a severe neurotoxin and then blow ourselves up and jump into his lunchbox. Let him eat us. At least give him diarrhea. I will evolve a highly toxic species that looks like poop. Poison hidden in poop. I was dumbfounded. This brother tried to poop on my head last time. This time, he wants to poison my food with poop. I silently made another note of him. This brother, you'd better wish yourself luck in the future. After forcing the mini sandbox offline, I came to the sandbox carrying a white rubber hose. Using a hole under the ground between the 2 sandboxes, buried an underground pipe over 10 meters long, connecting the 2 worlds. This is my exclusive VIP passage. Without my permission, no one can enter. Then I went back to the room, Put on the VR glasses. Registered a player account. Those who insulted me are all noted in my little notebook. Logged into the game. Pitch black before my eyes. After half a day, my evolved species finally came ashore. This body, I looked at myself. A body as bizarre as those players. A black, long-haired, three-eyed crow. 2 normal eyes. And a vertical pupil in the middle, covered in black feathers, and unable to fly yet, only able to glide at low altitude for 3 or 4 meters. Sub-brain. This crow is as ugly as the big-eyed monster. According to the law of the uglier, the stronger, its potential should be just as powerful. Right? His potential should be just as powerful. Right? Sub-brain. This crow is as ugly as the big-eyed monster. According to the law of the uglier, the stronger, its potential should be just as powerful. Right? The creator brain quickly gave me a critical blow. Highly likely lacks extraordinary potential. Just a deformed species that simply failed to evolve. Deeply discouraged, but on second thought, it makes sense. The evolution of every life is unique. The big eyeball is a miraculous life formed by many coincidences. Hard to replicate, but my expectations are not high. It is enough as long as it can move. I entered the secret pipe between the 2 sandboxes. After traveling through a long and dark tunnel, light gradually appeared before my eyes. Coming back to my senses, I had already appeared in a dense forest, lush trees, verdant land. In the distance, terrifying giant beasts were roaring and chasing each other. A magnificent and vast scene of the primitive dense forest. I finally entered my own sandbox, lifting my 2 crow claws, walking with a swaggering defiant stride, straight towards the Babylon tribe. The Babylon tribe, houses well arranged, had flourished to a certain extent. Although the power of the 3 witches was much weaker than Gilgamesh's, they could still barely resist the invasion of the giant beasts. Humans were in the middle of a massive giant beast food chain, unable to resist the most terrifying giant beasts, but they wouldn't easily be treated as food either. After achieving stable survival, they multiplied their population frantically, because they needed a huge population base to give rise to more witches. Deep in the Green Mountain Valley outside the tribe, in a pool like a dreamland wonderland, 3 beautiful women were bathing. Over 10 years later, the 3 witches of back then were now in their 30s, at an age when insects died of old age. At 30 or 40, almost all of their peers had passed away, yet time seemed to have never left a trace on them. Brimming with youthfulness, fit and athletic, looking like teenage girls back then. Gilgamesh, after fusing the 2nd gene. Back then, Gilgamesh, after fusing the 2nd gene, lived for over 200 years. Now they are only in their 30s. Their long lives have just begun. Muj, soaking in the clear spring water, said lazily.
Another one passed away last night. The sisters we grew up with back then have long since turned gray-haired after long years have passed, only to realize only the bond between us 3 sisters is eternal. Everything around us is changing, yet only we do not grow old. What is it? My 2 sisters, high and mighty as the guardian deities of Babylon, yet all alone. Are you jealous of ordinary girls who have husbands and children?
Circe, show some respect. After seeing Circe fall back then, they swore to establish the 3 iron laws of witches. One must be a virgin before accepting the evil eye's blood, and is never allowed to have a beloved in their lifetime. Once becoming a witch, contact with any male is forbidden. After becoming a witch, contact with any male is forbidden. 3. Witches are not allowed to abuse their power against humans. Circe is a classic negative example. Her mental power is too strong. So strong that if she fails to control her emotional leads, she will kill weak men. For over 10 years, every month, a few men in the tribe would die mysteriously. 4 new witches have emerged in recent years. Combat power is no longer scarce. Moj and Shuangyin decided to take action to suppress Circe, but after the great battle, they discovered with horror that Circe had secretly become much stronger than them. It took the joint effort of both to suppress her. It seemed that compared to kind witches suppressing themselves, the evil witch Circe indulged her mind freely, which instead made her mental power stronger and stronger. Another 5 years passed. Year 16 of Babylon. Circe was now unfathomable.
Even together, they could only barely contend with her. How about it? Are you really not going to try, rather than suppressing it? It is better to indulge yourself. No, this method is the wrong path. We must figure out the correct method of witch mental cultivation. Since I cannot convince you,
I can only resort to force. Circe's face gradually grew cold. An extremely icy mental aura spread from her body.
The surrounding water rippled away in waves.
You've actually become this strong. Much. And Shuangyin's expressions froze. Do it. 4 newly born witches appeared by the pool, holding black canes. Moj was already prepared, planning to combine the strength of all witches
to defeat Circe.
So what if you join forces? Circe's violent spirit suddenly surged. The water splashed violently under the impact. A few fish were shocked, floating belly up. Is this the power of a witch? A sudden, gentle voice came. A strange creature never seen before. A 3-eyed crow with black feathers, at some unknown point, was standing quietly on a lush tree. Standing quietly on a lush tree, watching everything they did. Who is there? The witches' minds were deeply shaken. This place is surrounded by a mental aura. No male can sneak close.
But no.
Kill him together first. All witches, including Circe, attacked at the same time. A strong mental shock gathered in one place. Even the most terrifying giant beast would die instantly. But when this power hit the 3-eyed black crow, there was no sound at all. How is that possible? All the witches looked at this crow, thirstily and hoarsely, the same thought echoing in their hearts. What kind of power is this? This is the power of meditation. All the witches looked at this crow, thirstily and hoarsely, the same thought echoing in their hearts. What kind of power is this? This is the power of meditation. I said so, standing on the branch. Of course, it is not the power of meditation. They live on mental power, with the help of the creator brain. Naturally, they couldn't cause any damage to me. Actually, I am just an ordinary, deformed, weak chicken. Who are you? For the first time, the witches saw other than humans. A talking, intelligent species. They recalled ancient myth, intelligent species other than humans. Are the great intelligent giant beasts.
Which is the creator?
You are a god. God. If you think so, then I am a god. I am one of the intelligent species once created by the creator. Unlike you, although I am powerful, I have no ability to reproduce. Unique. I was appointed to govern all living beings in the world, as the single being. God of wisdom. Shemu. You can also call me by another name. Mercury. I came to ignite the spark for the backward Babylon tribe.
And bring you the truth of the world.
What is the truth of the world? Truth is all the rules of the world. The source of all power, everything you see, is covered within the truth. I want to give to the mortals on earth the triple truth knowledge of meditation, alchemy, and witchcraft. Meditation, alchemy, witchcraft. Everyone's expression changed completely. Back then, Gilgamesh was gifted 3 treasures of civilization. Now, they will receive the triple knowledge of truth. We actually met the legendary deity. It feels like a dream. First, meditation is the way to cultivate the spirit, giving you the foundation to become a god, the path to great lives like us. Second, alchemy is the occult science of creating the unknown of life, the way to pry open the door of truth. All things in the universe generate and overcome one another, and substitute one another, which is the principle of alchemy. The secrets of alchemy lie in the Trinity formula. All things in the universe generate and overcome one another, and substitute one another, which is the principle of alchemy. The secrets of alchemy lie in the Trinity formula. One substance pleases another substance. One substance overcomes another substance. One substance dominates another substance. They listen half-understandingly, captivated and entranced, with nervous expressions, for fear of remembering a single word wrong. Third, witchcraft is a magical power that can allow your spirit to decompose earth from fire and decompose flame from the ocean. According to this principle, from that one thing will arise many extraordinary transformations. The 3-eyed crow on the tree suddenly fell to the ground. After saying this, I left the sandbox world directly from the crow and went offline, exiting the game interface, putting down the VR glasses. Finally done. I memorized it several times, for fear of saying the wrong word. Acting is not my strong suit. If it weren't to cure my illness, I wouldn't bother memorizing lines. To guide the development of civilization, act as the creator, and not reveal the weakness of being a weakling. It's really distressing. Honestly, a terrifying figure like Gilgamesh, if appeared in front of me in equal scale, could crush me to death with a single palm. Even the power held by the 3 witches was obtained through countless trials of death, making them extraordinary beings beyond my reach. Yet I have to fool them. It gives me a headache just thinking about it. I am basically just an ordinary person. After going offline, I took a shower and restarted the small sandbox game. In barely a few minutes, the players all came online, swearing and playing the game like crazy, trying hard to evolve new species, using a world to run sandbox simulations of civilization, to find a way to cure my terminal illness. Such an exaggerated action, probably no one else in the world would do. But this path is truly hard to walk. The seed has been planted among the 3 types of knowledge. I look forward to alchemy the most. The seed has been planted among the 3 types of knowledge. I look forward to alchemy the most. Creating potions and elixirs, researching a way to cure cancer. But alchemy only exists in myths, and realizing it will probably be very difficult. Meanwhile, meditation and witchcraft should work. Yoga meditation, Eastern Qigong internal observation. They all have similar elements, cultivating mind and body. Expanding essence, chi, and spirit is a sure thing. As for witchcraft, once mental power is high enough, it will naturally develop various exquisite applications. The preparations are ready. Now it just depends on what they can develop into. It is just a pity that extraordinary species are still too few. Things like the evil eye, if there were more of them, could provide better inspirations. I sighed and looked at those players. Pay more attention, will you guys? These guys don't think about evolving properly all day into species with extraordinary potential, but only think about crooked ways, messing with me every other day. A bunch of beasts. I have to find a way to squeeze you dry. Just then Soqing's voice came from the door again. Brother Lin Chen, you promised to go to the class reunion with me. It is time to set off. It took me a moment to react. Going to the city to clear my head is not a bad idea. Changing into the new clothes I bought earlier. I walked out with big strides. Holy crap, the giant has walked out again. Run! The attack on Titan is coming again. I have 6 legs. I just need to run faster than you guys. A crowd of ants on the ground shouted in panic, sprinting away. I didn't mean to deliberately crush them to death either. Just thinking about how to fully utilize these free intellectual labors. Going out the door, Soqing was already waiting outside on her electric scooter. The 2 entered the city and arrived at a large private room on the 2nd floor of a mid-range restaurant. Pushing open the door, a group of vibrant young men and women were gathered around the table, eating and chatting. As soon as I walked in, the whole private room erupted. Who is this? Must have got the wrong room.